Stand by.
Hey, everybody.
Good afternoon. Welcome to YOSA's Q&A session. I'm Troy Peters. I'm the music director of YOSA, and I'm here with Martin Sanchez, the conductor of YOSA Capriccio Strings. Mr. Sanchez,
Hey,
thanks for being
everybody.
with us today. Good afternoon. Welcome to YOSA's Q&A session. Hold on.
So I'm hearing a little echo here.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was a little YouTube following us along here. So, Mr. Sanchez, tell us a little bit about how you decided to become an orchestra conductor. You are the orchestra director at Ed White Middle School. You also conduct for YOSA, but what brought you to this place? How did you go down this career path?
Let's see. I think it starts in middle school, and it's actually not a story that not a lot of people know. And in fact, when I do tell people this story, they're really surprised at it. So it starts back when I was in the 6th grade. I went to a school that's called the Edgewood Fine Arts Academy. And that school, at the time, it was a 6th through 12th magnet school for fine arts in the Edgewood Fine Arts, or Edgewood Independent School District. And they didn't have a traditional orchestra program. So it was just more of a general music class. So I ended up learning piano and guitar and electric bass. And I was just kind of like hopping back and forth from different instruments for a couple of years. And as time went on, just started like falling in love with music and ended up playing in a band with some friends of mine. And when I became a sophomore in high school, that's when our school campus decided to add in an orchestra program and like a mariachi program. And so I ended up talking with the orchestra director at the time, and he was like, yeah, you should join. And so I joined the orchestra on campus. And when it came time to decide what instrument I was going to play, he asked me like, oh, well, you play the electric bass, right? And I was like, yeah, I play. And he's like, maybe you should try this. It's kind of similar, and in a way it is, like tuning wise it is, but styling is completely different. At least that's what I felt at the time. And so ended up doing that, played in the orchestra my sophomore year, and I didn't really think anything of it. I was like, oh, this is just something I do. And then later on, he ended up convincing me to join the mariachi because he was the orchestra and the mariachi teacher. So we did that throughout high school. And originally, I had wanted to be a computer engineer. And up until that point in my life, all the decisions I had made, they were going towards wanting to be an engineer. And life pretty much happened. I applied to like this high school program to where I could have finished out my ending years of high school and be completing my first 2 years of college at the same time. And I was like really excited. And then I didn't get into the program. So I was thinking like, man, like, what should I do? I was like so set on doing that. Eventually I just ended up talking to my orchestra teacher about it and like kind of made my decision there. It's like, well, I kind of really like this music thing. I've been doing it for a long time, for a couple of years now. Maybe I want to study music. So then from then on, I just, my orchestra director, he went out and bought me a whole bunch of like method books. And he's like, here, I want you to go to the practice room and start working on this stuff to prepare yourself for college. And I was like, okay, so I would go to the practice room every day for like my junior and senior year. I would still play with the orchestra, but I just mainly self-taught myself as much as I could, because I never took any form of private lessons up until to my college audition. So I was pretty much self-taught the entire time. Fast forward a couple of years, I do my audition for UTSA. I ended up going to UTSA and I graduated from there. Did my audition, and thinking back on it, they took a huge chance on me, and I'm super grateful for that. I know that because they took that chance on me, that's why I'm here today. That's why I am that orchestra director I am today. And so I auditioned over at UTSA, didn't know what direction I wanted to go. I didn't know if I wanted to do performance. I didn't know if I wanted to do music education. So I just kind of did the basic music stuff the first semester. And towards the end of that first semester is all the friends I would hang out with there at the UTSA music department. A lot of them were involved in a thing called the String Project, UTSA String Project. And so they're like, hey, you should come check it out one day. And so I did, and I ended up becoming an intern in that spring semester of my freshman year. And I was just hanging out in the back of the room watching them like teach other students, like real life students there in a classroom. And at first I was like, what do I do? I'm just sitting here. And then eventually one day somebody asked me like, hey, can you take this student up to the practice room and go work with them? I was like, okay, I can do that. So worked with that student for the whole spring semester. And just to be able to see them make that progress from like January to, I believe, May is when we finished, I was like, wow, that's so amazing. This is like the coolest thing. That was like my decision. I was like, okay, music education is where I'm gonna go. And so did that for the remainder of my time there at UTSA. And then when I was about to start student teaching, all my means of like my day-to-day life and how I earn my paycheck kind of went out the window. So I just so happened to be walking by Dr. Dowdy's office one day, and I heard him say it. He was like, hey, so yeah, YOSA's looking for somebody to work with their music after school program. And I kind of stopped in my tracks and I walked back and I walked into his office like, hey, can you tell me more about that? And so he told me a little bit more about the YOSA program, and he was like, yeah, I should contact YOSA. And that was back in 2013, I believe. And so contacted YOSA, and then that's how I got my first YOSA job. Started doing that. It was my first job out of college. And then I started working with the YOSA's summer camps. And around that time, that's about the time I got hired at Ed White back in 2014. And I've been there, this is my 6th year at Ed White, and it is the absolute best. I have the most amazing students there, and I miss them so much. And this has been real hard on me because like they drive my everyday life, and it's hard not being there for them in a time like this.
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, everybody's going through this, right? That a lot of the things that make us who we are, a lot of the things that we love most, we can't do right now without jeopardizing other people's safety. And to have this situation where we can't be with our students, I know is hard for all of us who teach and conduct. I remember that, Martin. I remember talking to Dr. Dowdy and then talking to you and having you start to work in a YOSA program at Edgewood Middle School, and you were just so such a great teacher, like right out of the gate. And you know that program at YOSA, we're not running that in Edgewood anymore, but we still have activities that are part of that YOSA umbrella that happen at in the schools that you work in, right? In that
Yes.
Roosevelt High School cluster, Ed White Middle School and Kruger Middle School and Roosevelt High School. And thanks to the Rackspace Foundation, we're able to do some projects there helping out school programs. So it's been kind of neat for me that you've had that continuity with YOSA. Sydney Silva had a question for you. You mentioned that you started off doing mariachi in high school.
Yes.
Did you do mariachi in college too? And do you ever play mariachi music today? And with all of that, then, you know, what made you choose orchestra music as your primary work rather than pursuing mariachi?
Okay, so yeah, after high school, me and a group of friends, we just kept playing, and that's how we made our living at the time. I would be doing gigs every weekend. and every Friday, Saturday, just being able to play like at weddings and quinceañeras and just house parties and stuff. I did play in college for UTSA for a little bit, um, and I just I loved it. I still do love it. I don't play anymore because it was just very time consuming to me. And it was kind of a hard decision to make, to be able to say, okay, well, it was fun, but now I gotta go on and do the orchestra stuff now. Um, so what pushed me more towards the orchestra side, um, in college when I was doing my music studies, the majority of my time was studying the orchestral side of stuff. So I felt like I learned so much more in that area, and I felt more confident to be able to teach an orchestra than I would have been to be able to teach a mariachi group. So um, this decision was hard, but it just kind of laid itself out for me by itself naturally. So
Right,
that's
right.
how that happened.
So I'm just curious. When you played mariachi, did you play guitarón, or or something else?
I played the guitarón primarily. That was my main instrument. There was a couple times where I would help out maybe a friend's group and play in the armonía section. So that's like guitar, viola. Um, just because they kind of go hand in hand, like
Right.
the function that they play in the ensemble. Um, so, but primarily guitarón, and that was a kind of a hard but easy instrument to learn. But just being a bass player in general, like you just have to think bass function. This is your role within the ensemble,
Right.
and that's what makes it. Well, what made it easy transition into that.
Right. The rhythm in guitarón is always really interesting to me. The number of tunes where it's in 3/4 and there's a waltz rhythm, but the guitarón has these hemiola kind of
Yes.
syncopations so often. And I find I've always been really fascinated by that, or the way that sometimes it'll even be like not on the downbeat.
Yeah.
And that I think that's, that's not what I grew up with.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I heard mariachi music, but I didn't know it well, and so I've been enjoyed getting to know that better. Um, you know, as a guy who, in Seattle where I grew up, there were a few mariachi groups, but I didn't cross paths with that very much, really, until I moved to San Antonio 10 years ago. It was the first time that I really started to like get to know that music well, and kind of learn how complex and interesting the rhythmic arrangements are, and the sort of traditions of what each instrument does, and it's pretty cool stuff. So, but you are into a lot of different kinds of music. One of the things that's always fascinated me about you is, you play classical music. You studied with Steve Zesserman from the San Antonio Symphony bass section, and you've played all kinds of orchestral music. But you also, if I'm not mistaken, have a little bit of a special place in your heart for heavy metal. Um,
Yes, that's
and
true.
can you tell us more about that? Like, what draws you to metal? What do you love about that music?
Well, it's that's real funny because when I tell my students that, they freak out and they're like, "What? That's not right. You can't like that music." And I asked them, "Why can't I?" And they're like, "Just the way you dress." And I was like, "Because I'm always dressed up. I always wear a tie to work and everything." And they're just always like, "Why though?" And I don't know, like there's a lot of similarities with metal music and classical music. Um, just the way they're composed and they're structured, and I'm more when I listen to that music, like I know people have their preconceived like thoughts on it and like, oh, well, they're just screaming, they're like there's like a whole nother agenda to it, there's a whole message behind it. But when I'm listening to it, I'm listening to the musicality of the musicians, and there's tons of bands out there, especially with the guitar work and the bass work and the drums. I'm a very rhythmic driven person, and just that type of music gets me real excited because I can listen to a band and be like, wow, this group, like they're really on it. Like, and there's the way they distinguish themselves from other groups because there's good groups, and then there's groups that are just kind of like meh out there, and it's like they really know how to like catch my ear because I'm always trying to listen for something. I'm listening for the music. Like whenever I listen to any kind of music, not just the metal music, it's like I hear the music first. And then maybe like the third or fourth time I hear a song, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a singer and there's lyrics. I gotta listen to that too. So music, just the music jumps out at me first. And like I said, just that connection. Many times metal has been compared to classical music. And there's even been times like one of my favorite groups, Metallica, they've done 2 concerts with the San Francisco Symphony. And they like just hearing concerts like that where you get a mixture of both worlds and it works. It really works. And that just brings much joy to me.
Well, and there's virtuosity, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
this display of, you know, speed and intensity, and rapid articulation and things like that. That, you know, some classical music is absolutely about that. When you think about, you know, the way virtuoso violin music, like Paganini or something like that,
Mhm.
there's some real similarities in the way that guitarists work in, especially in metal. You know, where this, you know, just the speed, right? Just the thing of like double kick drum on the drum set going just ridiculously fast, and
Mhm.
bass playing and all kinds of stuff like that. I get that. It's powerful stuff. You mentioned Metallica. What other bands are you into?
Oh, I could go on and on. But yeah, just over the years, it's changed because there's so many different subgenres in between like metal, and like people can argue that all day long, but I love it all. So a band that the band that really got me into metal music was a band called Slipknot. They were the first group that I heard them and I was like, oh my gosh, like what is this? I've never heard this type of music before because growing up, I always listened to what was on the radio and just like whatever was on FM radio. So like pop music, hip hop music. Um, Grew up with a family that always listened to Tejano music and all that kind of stuff. So when I heard that for the first time, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And I discovered them because of a neighbor of mine. He was like, he's actually the one who got me into playing electric bass. So he was like, check out this band. So I checked them out. So Slipknot, that's the first one that comes to mind. I System of a Down was another band that I really got into for a long time. And then I started spreading off into different like heavier genres. And then I got into punk music and I was into a band called Tsunami Bomb for the longest time. And then I started supporting local music. And there's a band here in town um, that made it pretty big on a huge metal label. They're called Upon a Burning Body. It's kind of a weird name, but they're really cool guys, and I got to know them over the years. Right now, I'm into this band from Japan called Baby Metal, and they're like amazing. At just the musicality of that group, like
Absolutely, I love them.
it's huge. Like they're they like to mix metal with all kinds of world type music, and it's their most recent release was just has so many different types of music mixed together. They have metal with pop, they have a metal with like a Bollywood type sounding music. Um, and they're just they're out there, and that just attracted me to them, and I can go on and on. So yeah.
Well, we have another question here from Deborah Garza, who asked about her son goes to school on the south side of San Antonio and there's no orchestra class. So he does mariachi at school. He's got private lessons. He's playing at YOSA. And his mother asks, are there any ideas for how to get more orchestra practice? If you're in a school without an orchestra program, but you're doing mariachi, you're doing private lessons, you're doing YOSA, any other thoughts on what somebody at the high school level can do to pursue other orchestra opportunities?
My immediate thought would be find some friends like that are playing also, and just experiment. Like just do something to get you playing. Um, I know growing up, me and my friends used to get together, and even into college, more so in college, we would get together and just play. We would find music, just weird, random, obscure music. Hey, let's try this out. Let's hang out on Friday. Let's get some pizzas. Let's do something. Let's just make music together. And that's the first thing that immediately comes to my mind.
Right.
You can also try and find, maybe there's people in your community that are playing. I know there's several community groups that are here in town, and maybe if that might be an option if it is, if you think you're ready for that. That's what I can think of.
The one other thing that I'd say is that even if your school doesn't have an orchestra program, it may be that you could audition for Region Orchestra by talking to your mariachi director or your band director at school. And it depends on the school, but that's something to explore, whether you might still be able to do solo and ensemble or region or some of those TMEA activities that are happening, even though there's not an orchestra class at your school. That's something to check out. Fernanda Cuevas asked about private lessons. Do you have any tips on how to teach private lessons? How is that different from what you do as a classroom teacher? And what is that, if somebody's starting out trying to teach lessons, what should they be looking for? How does that work?
Private lessons is completely different from teaching in a classroom. When it comes to private lessons, I feel like you're making more of a connection with that student. You're learning about them. You see them. When I was teaching private lessons, I was seeing my students once a week, and just over time, you get to know them. Tips for teaching private lessons: get a journal, and every time you see them, write down what you did, write down where you want them to be. Just kind of, so that way you have some kind of frame of reference. To think, okay, this is what we did last week. This is what I want you to work on for next week. They should be knowing this by the next lesson. And if they show up knowing, or if they show up and they did all that, you can go from there. Like, okay, this is the direction we're going to go. And also know what kind of rep you want to be teaching them. I know for me, when I was doing my private lessons, or when I was taught private lessons with Steve Zesserman, he had a total method of teaching. He was like, I want your orchestra excerpts to be your etudes, because that's more real world stuff that you can use towards like putting it into your musicality and playing. Because bass is kind of boring to begin with, just being very honest on that, because our bass parts are not the greatest at times. But there is tons of stuff out there that just gets ridiculous. And I remember working on Ein Heldenleben when I was in college, just the orchestra bass excerpts. And that was just like really kicking my butt. But I learned a lot from it. So just knowing what kind of method you're gonna go, if you're gonna do, I'm gonna teach my student etude scales and some kind of rep, just having that thought out as you're working with your students.
That's great. The other thing that I would say, Fernanda, is that it's important when you identify something that you're trying to fix, if you don't have an idea about how to fix it, to remember that you can ask your own teacher for advice on how to teach things that you did in the past. And so, for me, when I first started teaching viola, I had played viola for a long time, but I hadn't really taught. And when I started teaching, I started to discover, oh gosh, I can do that, but I don't know how I learned to do that. So I would call my high school private teacher and say, here's one way I know to shift to third position. What else can I tell them to help with this? These days, of course, there's a lot of stuff online that you can find, but asking an experienced private teacher for advice is a great way to go, because the art of teaching a string instrument, so much of this is kind of apprenticeship and tradition, and we teach things that our teachers taught us. But if we give each other advice, then a lot of times you can have more solutions. The other thing that's really frequently true is that you can teach something one way and it'll work for 6 kids, and then kid number 7 will come in and you teach it the same way and they don't get it. So sometimes you have to have 5 ways to teach the same thing. So that if method A doesn't work, you try method B. And if method B doesn't work, you try method C. And sometimes it's when the 4th one happens that all the different things come together and it starts to work for that kid. So try to find more than one metaphor, more than one path to get to the thing you're trying to do, which it's not always easy, but it's important to try and keep finding new ways to teach things. Mr. Sanchez, are you, when you think ahead with YOSA Capriccio strings, and when you think back over the last few years, what kinds of things what kind of things would you like to be doing in the next couple of years? If when everything comes back to normal and we're all able to make music together in the same room again, what kinds of music or what kinds of projects would you like to do with Capriccio in the next couple of years?
That kind of comes down to the way I program. There's always a pattern with the way I program. I always try and get at least in my program, try and get one piece that's either an arrangement of like a real life orchestral work, just so that way I can be introducing these students to some of the great composers that are out there that they might not get. Because I've noticed that a lot of the students in my group at YOSA, I would say like over half of those students are not in a traditional orchestra program in their school. YOSA pretty much is their orchestra program. So they may not get the same kind of experience that another student would who is already in an orchestra. So I program at least one song that is an arrangement of a real life work. And most of the time the students seem to enjoy that because it's like, oh, I've heard that song before. I've heard it like in this movie. I've heard it on this cartoon, or they're familiar with the tune somehow. So I always try and program something like that. I program something that's very rhythmically challenging because, like I said, I'm very driven by rhythm. So, and just kids who can work well with rhythms is just something that, like I know that down the line, as they move up in the ranks of orchestras at YOSA, it's going to help them get there. And then I always try and program a piece that's out there. Like a couple of seasons ago, I did a song called Millennium Cyclone, and the kids absolutely loved that piece. There's like a whole bunch of different kind of sound effects in it, where they're doing glissandos and stuff, doing tremolos, and just making all kinds of like crazy chaotic stuff. It's like the idea behind the piece was like you're at a carnival or festival and you get on a ride and like you're kind of dizzy and stuff. And so just being able to program down the line to where students enjoy coming to YOSA. I love calling out a piece's name and be like, oh, take out Millennium Cyclone, and then you just hear like tons of kids in there just like, yes, I can't wait to do that piece, and they get so excited. So that's kind of where I hope to continue to do in the upcoming concert series we do here at YOSA, just being able to allow the students to have fun.
You mentioned that thing of taking out a piece of music and being excited about it. If you think back over your life, the music you've played at UTSA when you were a student, the music you've played elsewhere, what were those pieces that were just like totally thrilling in your life? What were those things where you were in an orchestra and went, oh my God, I'm so glad I got a chance to play this?
Oh, that's an easy one. For me, one of my favorite pieces to play is the 1812 Overture by Tchaikovsky. And the first time I ever played it was at UTSA, and I think I've played it like 2 or 3 other times, or as I've been playing in orchestras. And just that piece just means a lot to me. And every time I hear it, like I tear up a little bit because like it just gives me chills, and it was just so exciting. And a couple of years ago at White, for a festival that we did in Houston, I found this really awesome arrangement of the 1812 Overture, and we did it at the festival. And it was the first time that I had an orchestra go to a festival and just like take all the awards. And that orchestra was just like the top tier level orchestra that I've ever worked with at my campus, and I praise them very highly for that. And that orchestra, we ended up taking them, or we ended up getting invited to the YOSA Invitational that year. So it kind of just went hand in hand, and we played the 1812 Overture there in the Tobin Center. And it was just, that song just means so much to me. And it's really just been a song that gets me excited about playing every time I hear it.
Nice. Nice.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Mr. Sanchez. It was great to see you. Take care of yourself, and I look forward to having the chance to see you in person again sometime soon. Thanks for stopping by today. Everybody who watched us today, we'll be back next Sunday. Next Sunday at 2 o'clock, we'll be doing a Q&A with the YOSA Flute Choir conductor, Dr. Kristen Hayes. And so we hope you'll join us for that. And then we've got one more conductor from YOSA, Mr. Cavazos, coming after that. And then later, as we go into the summer, we're going to start to do weekly Q&As with composers and conductors and orchestral musicians from all over the world. We're going to start to have some really well-known and famous folks from the classical music world who will come in and do Q&As as part of this series. So stay tuned for more information on that. Thanks again, Mr. Sanchez.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.